Welcome everybody again. I am Jason Nazar, the co-founder and CEO of Comparably, and I am just really excited to have my friend Chris Hyams, the CEO of Indeed, here with us today. Hey, Chris.
Jason, thanks so much for having me. It's great to be here.
Of course. And for those of you that are tuning in for the first time, this is a session that we do on entrepreneur.com in conjunction with Comparably. And it's our If I Knew Then series. So it's talking to amazing CEOs about their career and business journey and the lessons that they learned along the way, both professionally and personally. And I've had the privilege to know Chris for many years, and I had a front row seat to watch the growth of Indeed. I was running my last startup, DocStock at the time, which we sold to Intuit, and I saw Indeed come on the scene like a bat out of hell and just grow like crazy. And from this auspicious startup, really has now become the leader in job platform across the world globally. And so, Chris, thank you again so much for being here. I'd love for you, just in your own words, to describe Indeed. Not that I assume that anybody here hasn't used it and knows it extremely well already.
Yeah, so Indeed has a really simple mission. We help people get jobs. And what that looks like is that we have jobs from all over the world in one place. We service job seekers primarily, so people who are looking for jobs can come and search for jobs. They can apply to jobs, they can interview for jobs, all on the platform. And for employers who are looking to hire, we have more job seekers that come to Indeed than anywhere else. We have about 250 million job seekers every month that come to Indeed. And so we have a bunch of tools and services for people looking to hire where they can post their jobs on Indeed, they can search resumes. And now we have a set of tools that actually automate a huge part of the hiring process for them.
Yeah. And just to give people a bit of a sense of the journey, you just reminded me. So when you started with the company a decade ago, there were 100 people on the team, right?
Yeah, we had about 130 people. I joined, it's coming up on 10 years. October of 2010 is when I joined. We had about 130 people today. And that was in Stamford, Connecticut and Austin, Texas. The company was founded in those two cities. And today we have just over 10,000 people in 30 cities and 16 countries around the world.
Yeah, that's amazing. I want to get to your background a little bit, but just from an overall, like, what's that experience been like for you? I mean, to be at one organization really as long as you have, which is pretty rare these days, and to see the company grow from 100 people to the global #1 brand in job recruiting and 10,000 employees, and you now obviously leading the company for some time. Like, just from a high level, what's that experience been like for you?
Yeah, it's been breathtaking. At the same time, this is the longest I've been at any company, but I am sort of a serial monogamist at work. In tech, I've had 3 jobs. I joined a company in Austin in 1996 called Trilogy. I was there for 9 years. I left and started my own company. I did that for 6 years, and then I've been in Indeed for 10 years. So what's different about Indeed, obviously, is the trajectory. And so I think that it has been, I've really, while I'm an older guy, I'm in my early 50s, I really feel like I've grown up at Indeed as well, along with the company. It's been an extraordinary experience. And a big part of it for me was, interestingly, I joined Indeed. It was at 130 people. It was the largest company that I'd ever joined. So the startup I joined in Austin was only about 70 people. And then my own company was just me when I started. So Indeed felt like a big company at 130 people. And what was really amazing, and I'm sure we'll get into this in the discussion, but all of the bones and the structure and the DNA of what the company is today, it was 100% there the day that I joined. And there was a really clear mission to help people get jobs, a really clear set of values. And we can talk about the values, in more detail, but that stuff was all there, the raw materials. And so to me, looking back, it almost feels nothing is inevitable, but what I've been able to witness and be really fortunate part of over the last decade is just seeing the seeds of this thing that was really fully formed as a vision just kind of meet its potential. That's what, what I see. And I think there's still a lot of potential ahead. But what our two co-founders, Ronnie and Paul, had already built by that time was something that was truly amazing. And, I'm just really, really grateful to see that it has been able to help as many people as it has. And that's really what it's all about, is how many people we can help.
Yeah. I'd love for you to walk us through just, where, like, what role did you start at? How long did you stay there? And what was that progression? And then, to me, the really fascinating thing is I'm sure there's a bunch of folks that are thinking, well, how would I join a company when it's 100 people and grow to be a CEO? And I think what I'm curious is, like, what did you do differently? Obviously you came in at some level of seniority, but you didn't come in as the CEO, all those 10 years ago. So you obviously have a set of skills and mastered new skills along the way that just kept raising your ceiling of your potential. And I kind of want to dissect that for how other people might be able to do that as well.
Yeah, so this is maybe a frustrating topic for some people in terms of how I answer it, because there's multiple different types of people in the world, and there's some people, my eldest daughter is one of them, who, at a very young age sat down and wrote out her 20-year plan and knew exactly what she wanted to do and how she wanted to get there. And I'm someone who lacks ambition in the traditional sense. So I have incredible ambition for wanting to get stuff done and wanting to do things that are useful and helpful, with an almost reckless disregard for, my job title or things like that. So so I can talk about the progression, but it was definitely it's not a 7-point plan that someone else could follow, because I had no aims to become the CEO of Indeed when I joined Indeed. I fell in love with the company, and a big part of it was that I'd had my own startup before, and so I had been a founder and a CEO, and my company actually started within a month of when Indeed started, and had a very different trajectory. We sort of went up and then we went down. We, at our peak, were 16 people, and so I joined Indeed with a huge amount of humility around how hard it is to start something and get it off the ground, and how much of a perfect storm a successful company is. I mean, there's also no formula for making companies successful. It's the right idea at the right time with the right first 10 people, and a whole bunch of other things that just have to go magically right. So I came in, I was hired in October of 2010 as the VP of product. And one thing that's really, I think, unique about how Ronnie and Paul built this company is that a lot of companies will go and they'll come up with an idea, they'll go ahead and raise some money, and then they'll hire a leadership team. And what Ronnie and Paul did, I like to describe as just-in-time executive team building. So they hired essentially one exec a year for 10 years. And they started out doing everything themselves. So Paul was the CEO and he ran sales and marketing, and Ronnie was the CTO and he ran product and engineering. And over time, as those things got a little bigger, then they hired a head of sales, then they hired a head of engineering, then they hired a head of client success. And I got hired as the head of product when the product had sort of reached a certain scale. And my angle at that time was, having just tried to build my own company, I just wanted to be the best startup employee possible. And I think, and you've been through this multiple times, you're a serial, you know that there's something different about when you're that person at 3:00 in the morning and things aren't going the way that you want to, and you're sort of all alone. What do you want more than anything else? And I felt like I had that feeling. And so I think I knew a little bit about what Ronnie and Paul wanted. And so I just wanted to understand, what their priorities were, what they cared about. And really it was almost like an anthropological exercise for me. I'd worked in a couple of startups. One was mine and one was this other one in Austin. And there was something about Indeed that was just different. I got there, it was a small company, but it was profitable. It was growing like crazy, small team who just loved what they were doing and believed so fiercely in this mission. And so I just wanted to figure out what it was and then just try to make sure that I could preserve that. And that's really like, if there's one thing I feel like for the last 10 years that I've tried to do, it's just remain, like keep that ember that was there, you know, glowing all the way through. Because building a company that gets to 100 people and what at the time, you know, was in the low tens of millions in revenue, but profitable and growing and really, really helping people with this mission. How did they get there, and how do we keep doing that stuff? And so my journey there, just like to get the stats out. So I came in, I ran the product organization. As the company started to grow, I then, about 5 years later in 2015, moved into a role as president where I basically was responsible for the technology side of the business, so the product and engineering teams, and the client side of the business, so the sales and the client success teams. And a big part of that was really just what was the next big challenge for the company. And we had been founded in these two locations, in Stamford with the client side and Austin with the tech side. And there was a big kind of chasm between those two sides of the business. When Ronnie and Paul set it up, there was deliberate independence, and it worked really well for the first handful of years of the company, because the product team could just focus on what are we doing for job seekers? Mm-hmm. Put job seekers first. How do we build the best product in the world for job seekers? And don't get distracted by anything else. Sales team, figure out how to sell this to employers. If we bring all the job seekers here, then you're going to figure out how to sell stuff. And that worked really well from a purity of the mission and this value of focusing on job seekers. What didn't work well is we were not really listening to our clients, because we were focused on the job seeker, which was great and is still a foundational idea of the business. But our sales and client success teams were on the front lines talking to our customers every day. They knew all the things that, you know, could be so much better or were, you know, really painful or didn't make sense. And so Ronnie asked me essentially to sort of look after both sides, to try to figure out how we could bring the two sides of the business together. And that it was a timely point also, because when I started, all our products were just job seeker products. And then we had this advertising system that employers could go and take the jobs that existed on their career site or their ATS and advertise them to basically have job seekers get sent there from Indeed. But we really then started to build out tools and products for employers, because the sort of strategy for the business for the last decade that I've been there, you know, number one is this anchor. What are the things that worked, and let's keep true to those. And then number two is how do we fulfill our mission? Our mission is to help people get jobs. And as when I started there, really just a pure search engine, the way that we fulfilled that mission was we helped people find all the jobs that were out there and click on them, but then they left Indeed and we had no idea what happened afterwards. And so what became really clear is that if we want to be more helpful, we have to be able to participate in more of that process. We have to be able to help people apply to jobs and interview and things like that. So that meant actually employers became our customers too. And we started building products for employers for how they can post jobs and manage the experience and do assessments and interviews on Indeed. And so that became just, there was a specific goal in that, which was to unite the two sides of the business. And so I did that for 4 years, and then had this opportunity last April when the CEO of the company at that point, Deco, who is from our parent company, Recruit, Indeed was acquired in 2012. He became the chief operating officer of Recruit as a whole. And so asked me to step into this role. Again, so it wasn't a big master plan. I wasn't like trying to set up the chess pieces to get here. But it was an opportunity to really try to lead the growth and innovation of the company. And, because we really are, we're a technology and product led organization. It's really just about how do we continue to innovate and make it easier and simpler and faster for people to get jobs. That's what my focus is.
Yeah. I've known you to be one of the most humble and thoughtful leaders that I've met in my career. I think it was very similar to the ethos of Recruit and Deco. I do want you to be willing to talk about yourself a little bit more in the sense of, look, there's some things that you are doing differently as a leader that give you the capability to grow with an organization, right? A pretty common, paradigm in venture is, when folks invest in a company like me, they're always wondering, hey, is this founder going to scale with the business? Are the early employees the right ones to be there later on? In fact, the Waze CEO said one of the toughest decisions you have to make, right, is that often the early employees aren't the right ones to then be at the company at scale. So there's clearly something different about you. Like, you've had these capabilities where you could be at a 16-person startup that you founded and thrive in a 100-person organization, but now lead a 10,000-person global organization. And I just want to try to unpack those for other folks. Like,
Sure.
what is it that you think that you do that's different and unique that has helped you in your career keep going on that journey, and how can other people start to master those same skills?
Yeah, so I don't know what I do better than other people. I can talk a little bit about how I think about this stuff. I mean, so the first thing, just for clarity though, the person that I was when I was running a 16-person company, like I'm the same guy, but I have a lot of experience. I've learned a whole lot along the way. You can't take any, professional athlete and, take them when they're in high school and put them in the same position and they're going to be there. And a lot of that, I think whatever analogy you want to use, I mean, a lot of it is scar tissue. A lot of it is just messing up a whole lot of things and having, so I think one of the things that's really important to me is humility, and which means like understanding and embracing those screw ups. Like, I think it's actually the greatest fodder for personal growth is things that you really, really just like blow badly, and being willing to look at that honestly and squarely and just try to unpack it and understand what was going on there. And it doesn't mean that you can prevent failure in the future. So I think like the hardest thing is that nobody likes failure. And with my startup, and so you've been through this multiple times, and I'm sure you heard similar things. When I had my startup before, I would meet with people who were experienced, and they would say, well, with your first startup, and I'd be like, shut up. This one is going to be successful. There is no first startup here. But clearly I was wrong. And some people's first startup is successful, but the messing things up and being willing to look at it honestly is a really important piece of that. I think with Indeed, so here's like the big insight that I had. I was probably in my late 30s when it came to it. Like, if we're just being like totally honest, and personal here, I'm the kind of guy who always wanted to be like the best at whatever I did. And so I really good at like diving in and being incredibly diligent and learning everything, whatever it is. But I figured out pretty conclusively by my 30, like I'm not the best at anything. But what I'm actually really good at is, because I can like dive in and study these things, I happen to have, a skill that I'll take credit for is I can recognize things that are good. So like, I'm not the guy that comes up with like, here's the brilliant new thing. I'm not the Elon Musk. I'm not the Steve Jobs, that has that sort of singular vision. But I'm really good at recognizing if you have a really good idea. I think I'm pretty good at telling the more promising ideas from the less promising ones, and then combining that with the humility of, and I'm probably wrong. So I know we talked about this the last time we were on a stage together, but Indeed's entire, and this is, again, I got to inherit this. I didn't invent this here, but it was something that really resonated when I got here, is that, we're just incredibly experimentally driven. We just believe that knowledge and experience are really important, and they're totally insufficient. And the more sure you are that you are right, the more painful the failure is likely going to be. And so we run thousands. We have, at any point in time, I think right now we've got about 5,000 A/B tests running across all of our products. And we have really good empirical data over all the time I've been here. 2/3 of those tests fail. And it's pretty consistent that when you look at it, about 1/3 of the time, this idea that we had, this product or this feature or this test that we launch has some positive impact. About 1/3 of the time, there's no impact at all. Doesn't matter how brilliant or visionary or insightful the people were. Literally, you roll it out and nothing positive comes of it. And 1/3 of the time, it actively destroys value. And so the key insight from that is that most of the time, we're not good at predicting the future. And so you have to combine, picking the best ideas that are available, but then trying a whole bunch of stuff. And so that, I think, to me, like the acknowledgement that I'm not, the singular visionary who's going to be right. And, damn you all, you're just going to do things my way. In my case, that definitely, and there are times in my career where I was a little more certain about stuff, and that didn't work out as well. And so what I figured out was being more open and experimental, and then just designing for failure. So like, can we try a whole bunch of things and expect that? Because if you've got 1/3 of the time, ideas that are adding a huge amount of value, that's actually really good. As long as you stop doing the ones that aren't working and then just put more investment in the stuff that is working, then you can actually experiment and find stuff. So I think that was really important for me. And I think everyone has a different set of skills. If there's someone who really is just like the unique visionary innovator, like go with that. But for me, recognizing, what other people's strengths were and trying to leverage those, I think has been really helpful. And then just like the growing over time, the other thing in that recognition is I think I'm pretty good at looking at when something is working and distilling like, here's the 2 key things of that made this work. So that was like what I described as the anthropological study of Indeed. I kind of broke down what is this thing about the mission? What are these values? What are these things that actually drive the decision making? And distill that into simple enough stuff that I could then spit it back out to people in a way that when we hired new people, because the hardest thing about scaling a startup is there's a reason that it works when you start, and then that usually gets forgotten and lost along the way. So I really think the most important thing that I've done is, and part of it is that because it wasn't my baby, I think sometimes you can be really attached to your own baby, but like I just came in, I just fell in love with this company. I fell in love with what they had done. So I'm just the world's biggest fan. And so it's important for me as this fan to like let everyone know, hey, here's what's great. Here's what works. Here's why the mission is important. Here's why putting job seekers first. You've got a marketplace. There's 2 sides. And how many entrepreneurs do you talk to who are trying to build a marketplace, and you ask them who's the most important, and everyone says, well, everyone's important. Mm-hmm. That's like a guaranteed failure. It just means, either you're not being honest with yourself or you're not being honest with the person asking the question. So Ronnie and Paul made this really important decision early on. Job seekers are the most important. The employers are the one who pay us. We have no business if they're not giving us money. But if we put the job seeker first and we make really difficult decisions that sometimes actually really upset our paying customers or make it really inconvenient for us as a business. But if we do that and we do that consistently, we're going to create a better experience for job seekers. And at the end of every successful job search is someone who made a hire, and you can build a business around that. So like recognizing that and just repeating it over and over again and then reinforcing it. So that's the stuff that I've tried to do that I think has been the most important in the scaling. And obviously there's new types of problems that come up when you're bigger. Some of them are scale and some of them are going from having an office in Connecticut and Austin to having offices around the world and understanding the differences about how business is done in Japan and how business is done in Germany and Brazil. But if you have the few kind of operating principles that you can come back to and reinforce, then I think it really helps. And so that's kind of what we've tried to do is how do we still keep Indeed totally recognizable at 10,000 people? So that anyone who was here as a startup, if they came back, they'd be astonished at the size and scale, but they would say, oh, I recognize that. Ronnie used to say that all the time, or that's exactly how we did things. Yeah. That's really, I think, has been incredibly important.
What do you think when you look at other leaders, what do you say to yourself, hey, these are mistakes that folks are making? And I don't just necessarily mean, Fortune 500 CEOs in your position. You have 1,000 plus managers at the company. What are the things that you and your team try to coach them to get better at, and what are the areas that you see people going down the wrong road as a leader, maybe not intentionally out of bad will, but because they don't have that, scar tissue that, you've lived through and other folks have?
Yeah, I think the first thing, just to get back to what I was saying before, my greatest asset is all of the failures. And so I think that the biggest mistake people make is like the failure is not an option concept. And look, sometimes you have to, as a business, as a small business, you can only place one bet. And so Indeed was very clear early on, this is the one thing, this is the only thing that we're doing. And they happen to be right. And that's just, are you right and lucky or not? And there's not a whole lot you can do about that. But once you start to expand beyond that, I got myself into trouble in the past, and I see people getting themselves into trouble when they're too rigid. And again, it's a balancing act. It doesn't just mean that you just like loose and have no idea what's going to happen. But the right balance between conviction which is a good thing, and certainty, which is a bad thing, I think. And a big part of that is because, look, if you're lucky enough to be in business for 10 years, it's not going to be the same business 10 years later. You're not going to have the same people. And I mean, hopefully, we have a lot of people who've been with the company for 10 years, but we have a lot of people, the vast majority of the company started in the last couple of years just because we've been growing so much. And the world is different. We'll get into the world in the last 6 months being radically different. But even if you just look at when Indeed started, when I started, the company was, 6 years old already, and we had like 4% of our traffic was from mobile devices. So like that hadn't even happened yet. And then how much has the world of work changed, and how much is the world around us changing? So I think, adaptability is something that we talk a lot about at Indeed, and leaders need to really be, flexible and expecting that things are going to change. And so for us, the way, I was kind of saying this before, it's important to have some anchors. What are the things that are, because you can't just like float at sea with no anchor. So you need to have a few things. And so for us, it's the mission. We help people get jobs. And we have this vision, which is, we took the Amazon dash button and just like put an Indeed on it. And like the vision is really simple. It should be as simple for a job seeker to get a job as pushing a button. And that's not changing. And then we have we have these core values. We have these 5 core values. And those are kind of like the operating principles. And then pretty much everything else can change so you need to have some structure and some things that people know, like this is going to be true 10 years from now, 50 years from now. When robots are running the world, like these things are still going to be true. And then you have to just like accept that everything else could change. And that to me is the difference between being able to grow from where we were to where we are today, and not, and again, a lot, it's impossible to discount good fortune and good luck. A lot of things, have to kind of fall in the right way. And the timing of when Indeed launched and what else was out there at the time, it was exactly the right time. And I think if they had launched the company 5 years before, the market wouldn't have been ready for it. And if they'd launched it 5 years later, someone else would have come along and done it already.
Yeah. I'm curious to get your take on this. And you brought this up. I feel like the pendulum has almost swung too far on either the way that we embrace failure or the linguistics we use around it. And I remember when I was 27 years old, starting a venture-backed company, the popular phrase was fail fast, which really is just the way of saying, make all the mistakes that you need to quickly so that you get to the right answer, as fast as possible. And you brought up this important thing, is that I think people are too rigid. I almost feel like, and maybe this is something more in venture-backed companies where, you have the advantage of having a lot of money and people are jumping roles all the time. But, a, a small business Main Street, they don't have the advantage of saying, well, I'm just going to fail on this one and get the next one. If you're a parent, it's not like, well, I can mess up on this kid and I got 3 more behind them. And, I think that I've been trying to figure out the best way to talk about this with my own team of go take risks, go get learnings. But I actually have stopped trying to use the word fail because I don't want to put out there that we're not going to win. Maybe we're not going to win in the short term, but all we're doing is running a process so that we add value to end users, to customers, and win in the long run. And it's just one of those areas I kind of feel like we've embraced it too much, this idea of glorifying the fact that just being in the arena and failing is okay itself.
Yeah, so it's a really good point, and I think it's very easy to say these things and have them make no sense in a certain context. But I think the answer is that there's just a different scale for those things. So when I started at Indeed again, it was definitely a burn the boats. There was one thing and one thing only. It was search. We believed that the old way of finding jobs online, where you had essentially a classified model, and every site that was out there before Indeed was you pay to post a job. If you're a job seeker and when you're going there, you only see the jobs that somebody paid to post. Literally, the classified is how my grandfather, found jobs, was going to the New York Times and looking in the job postings there. And what Monster and Career Builder did was just take that and put it online. And we believed that a comprehensive and relevant search engine that took all the jobs from everywhere in the world and put them in one place like that. Yeah, that was the whole company was that idea.
And by the way,
and if that was wrong, then there's no company.
Exactly.
However, on the micro level, every single feature and every single algorithmic tweak and every single do people want to have a resume that they can use to apply to jobs, or do people want to be able to see ratings and reviews? But every single one of those things was an experiment. And so it was not fail fast, but it was like every single idea. We didn't just go ahead. So the biggest mistake, so anyone who has ever found some new app that somebody thinks is really cool and started using it, and then 2 years later they hated it, the reason is because what a lot of companies do is they start with something that is like really simple, maybe too simple, but it's like good enough that it's like, wow, this is great. I can record a video and share it with my friends. Okay. And then what you do is you get excited and you come up with 100 ideas and you put in 100 new features. And then suddenly it's not this simple thing anymore. And it's too complicated. And most of the things are useless. Look at Microsoft Word or look at Photoshop. Incredibly useful pieces of technology. What percentage of those do you use on a regular basis? Most people, 3%, 4%, and the rest of it is, then the stuff that you want is buried in a menu somewhere. So it's really important. If you're a small retail shop, you have the entire layout of your store to decide what goes on the end caps and what goes up front. What are you putting up at the register? Those are all decisions. And if you just decide this is how we're doing it, maybe you're lucky and you're right. But if you put something different at the register each day and then figures out what people check, like those are small experiments that you're failing. Then when you get to a 500 or 1,000 person company, you need to start making bets on whole new lines of business. And so we have tried to operationalize that as a business, but I think it's easy to misinterpret that, but I think it's just at what scale are we talking about? I can talk briefly about how we approach this of operationalizing the larger scale stuff. And I think what's really important is, you mentioned the venture model. And I think I have a lot of friends who are VCs. Let's just be totally frank though. The VC model is good for the VC. It's not good for the company in general. Because what they want, and what part of it I'm talking about is swing for the fences. Like go and do this big thing, bet everything. If it's a portfolio, that's a really great way to manage a portfolio. But the math is most companies will fail. And so for every single startup that's being told by their VC to go and swing for the fences and go all out on this idea, the VC is perfectly happy if 2 out of their 10 work and the other 10 shut down. Having been on the other side of that and being one of the 8 out of 10, it's not as pleasant over there. But I understand that's how the business works. So we try to think of it the same with our businesses, and without without the dire consequences of losing your job if your startup fails. But so what we've done is we've actually built an internal incubator that is a virtual venture model. And so once a quarter, anyone in the company can come and pitch ideas. And we actually have a whole team that's set up to help work with people on their pitches and help them do research and get all their materials together. And they pitch to the executive team. And we
Are you Mr. Wonderful or Mark Cuban in the Indeed Shark Tank?
Well, so it's actually grown. And so we have it used to be myself, the COO and the CTO were the committee there. It's now expanded where we have different GMs with different sort of investment theses around, are we helping small businesses or helping job seekers or helping enterprises? We have a whole one around social impact and different things like that. But so the idea is people pitch, and if one of the executives, it's a similar model though, actually to Shark Tank. If one of the executives likes the idea, then they become the executive sponsor. And so you become a board member, essentially. We fund the team, and we have like an angel seed, Series A, Series B, Series C range where, and this is like the key insight. And this is for almost any company. Again, I think that there's a scale that you can operate something. This was a huge radical mind shift for us. What the fail fast comes because most companies fail very, very, very slowly. And you build a product and you love it. And if it's not taking off, you just keep letting it limp along forever. So we were really terrible at shutting things down that didn't work. We were really good with features, but with new product ideas. So we just ended up getting more and more products. So the key model here is someone comes and pitches, an executive says, this is a great idea. We give you funding. The angel round is $150,000 budget and 3 months. Wow. And so like a startup, you have a budget and you have timeline, and the default is you run out of money and you run out of time and you shut it down. And so there's no emotion. It's not, it's not like I like you or I don't like you. The other key thing is that the sponsor is a board member, but a board member only. So they don't get to tell you what to do. Mm-hmm. You have monthly board meetings. They're there to be like a good board member and help you if someone needs help with legal, negotiating a contract with a vendor. They're supposed to go and harass our GC to open the doors, or if they need help from marketing, they can do things like that. They give their feedback, but the team is responsible for making all the decisions. They live and die by their own decisions. We actually have a whole staff that's just the staff for those teams. So the founder comes in as the CEO, but then we've got a whole group of engineers, data scientists, designers, growth marketers who they can basically build their team from and spend their budget on. And then at the end of 3 months, either they say, this was kind of interesting, but it didn't work, and they run out of money and that's okay. Or they say, oh, we think we found something, and they go back and pitch for another round of funding. And so the default is we're going to shut it down, but then they can go back and ask for $300,000 in 6 months, or a Series A or a Series B. And we have acquisitions where the business then says, hey, this is great. This is really good for enterprise clients. So we're now going to take this and make this mainstream. But what it's done is the time boxing is a radically different way of thinking about it. Like, we're going to give this idea 3 months. And what it means is we can actually say yes to so many more ideas, because if I'm not worried that we're going to get stuck with this thing, or if there's going to be some paralysis, if the default is we're going to shut it down unless there's something really compelling. So we've between this program, and then we do a version of this for all our new college grads, where we run an incubator just for all the new college grads every summer. We've launched over 130 new products in the last 5.5 years. 25 of them are still running right now. We've had 5 that have exited and become real businesses that are doing millions of dollars. And the key is that most of these are ideas that if someone else had pitched 6 years ago, I would have said no to, because but the idea of the sort of passion, the vision of one person who's going to make this thing work is like you can't. And that's part of what were the things that made Indeed work when it was early that we try to kind of continue on. So I think that idea is something that any business of any scale, you're not going to try launching new businesses, but here's an idea. We're going to try this for 2 weeks. And if it doesn't work, we're going to stop doing it. Mm-hmm. And so I think people are afraid to try things because they're afraid that it might go on forever. And so like, if you're willing to let things fail and run them as experiments, you can try more things. And again, unless you're the visionary who happens to pick everything right, this is a really good way to find out what your customers actually want and will use is by running a bunch of experiments.
Yeah. Well, if Indeed's not already in a bunch of MBA case studies for HBS or something, it should be. To me, I just think, I think what you said something so incredibly important, which is when you're trying to, break into an industry or you have to beat out incumbents, Indeed just stayed so maniacally focused on the way the future was of how people were going to find jobs, which was search and a long tail of search. And, you beat these online incumbents and traditional incumbents and just overtook them. It was incredible to kind of watch in real time, especially since, I was running a company that had a pretty large footprint of SEO traffic. We had about 30 million people a month come to DocStock, and what you all grew into was something incredible. Let me bring this back to you for a moment. So, if you could take a time machine back into your 30s and back into your 40s, at any one point in your 30s and any one point in your 40s, what professional or personal advice would you give yourself at each of those times and why?
Yeah, it's a really good question. My first pat answer is I've seen enough science fiction movies to know that if you have a time machine, you don't change the past. And I think that's sort of profound though, also because like what I wouldn't do, and I know this is too literal, but I think it's important. I wouldn't want to rob myself of having screwed up the things I screwed up, because I would much rather not be screwing them up now at this scale. Like it was really important. So part of the
wish that you didn't have to learn the hard way, or do you feel like most things?
I wish people didn't have to learn things the hard way, but I think people have to learn things the hard way. Or I'm a person who has to learn things the hard way. I do think if I could sit myself down and put, my hand on my shoulder and be like, you're going to screw a lot of stuff up and it's going to be okay. So I think I was too freaked out about failure. And that led to a lot of rigidity and intensity and probably driving a lot of people in my life around me kind of crazy. Again, you've been doing this a long time. You have a family and people around you who you love. Successful entrepreneurs can be very, tunnel vision focused, and these things take a long time, and you're going to be at it for a long time. And it's it's definitely it's not a marathon. It's like multiple marathons.
I'd love to dig in
decades
for a second. I mean, it's curious to me. I mean, I think some people watching might say, well, it's easy for Chris to say with perspective and all the success he's had now, it's going to be okay. How much in retrospect do you feel like the success you drove? Like I have a theory that a lot of successful people are actually driven not by a desire for success, but by a fear of failure. And like, I come from an immigrant family. It's just ingrained in you as a kid that like things can always go wrong. And so you have to overachieve to avoid these bad things that not can happen, but basically will happen. Your parents instill this in you from a young age. And I got to feel like some percentage of your success came because you were obsessed with wanting to get things right, whether it was for the customer or the company. If you had eased up on yourself, would you have been as successful? Or
yeah, look, so the time machine answer is no. If anything had been different, I wouldn't be sitting here talking to you today. I can say that. So for me, there was a really deep sort of 2.5 year experience around my startup B-side crumbling and failing. That was, it was a crucible experience that was absolutely necessary. And a big part of it was actually realizing that, at the time, I believed that business failing was the worst thing that could ever possibly happen. And I'm okay. And I felt that way, not when I got the job at Indeed and then Indeed was successful. Like part of it was actually doing a whole lot of personal work during that time. So started the company in 2005, 2008 hit, and we were in the middle of a round of funding. And I got a term sheet the day before Henry Paulson went to Congress and asked for $750 billion. And then like the next year and a half, 2 years was just struggling to stay alive. And I got, from a personal and emotional perspective, it was incredibly challenging and painful. And I felt like I was, all alone. And to some degree, it was my own thing. And I did a lot of work, and I got to the point at the end where actually for me, the big sort of revelation was like, I just want to know what the right answer is. I want to know if this thing is going to work. Because before I did have to have this like, definitely it's going to work no matter what. I'm going to do everything I can. But where I came out of this is, I ended up with this sort of theory that there's two patron saints of entrepreneurs, and it's Don Quixote and Mr. Spock. And successful entrepreneurs have to have a combination of those, or you have to have co-founders that one is the Don Quixote and one is the Mr. Spock. So it's really important. Like, no one would ever do anything new or different if they didn't believe that the whole world was wrong and backwards, and you just don't see it. Here's the thing. This is the new way. You have to believe that, and you have to be willing to put on the helmet and get on the horse and go and battle the windmills. But then, like, at least once a week, someone needs to, take the hat off, get off the horse, and be totally rational and dispassionate and logical, and look at the facts and say, is this working or not? And in the world boils down to things you can change and things you can't change. And there's more pain and suffering that I've experienced in my life than deciding in advance, this is something that can't change and I need to accept it, or this is something that can change and I need to, make it happen, and being wrong about that. And yes, grit and determination. Yes, that's the rigidity. And so for me, I had to do like a whole lot of personal work during the time. And I was waking up every morning and doing everything I could to get the next round of funding, to get the next customer, to make sure that the employees were taken care of, and being transparent with them. But I got to a point at the end where I honestly felt like, I just want to know if this thing is going to work or not, because I've got more fuel in the tank, and I want to work on something that's going to work, that's going to be able to help people. And if this thing isn't going to work, then no one else should be working on it either. And we should all go and find our next things. And so that was a really important lesson for me. And I also don't disagree with anything that you said, but in my experience, so there is one thing that I will say though, that, I wish, in terms of stuff earlier, certainly at Indeed, and that is around the importance of diversity. I think right now, kind of people are thinking and talking about this stuff in a way that is very different. You've been in the tech industry a long time. When I started in 1996, it's not something that anyone talked about. Mm-hmm. I worked at Trilogy, and there were very few women. There were almost no people of color. And that was just the way that it was. And that was the way that my graduate computer science program was like. And in my startup, it happened to be because the industry that we were in, that the team was about half women, and the executive team was more than that. But that wasn't, I didn't set out to do that. It just worked out that that's where the talent was. But I think it changed, it shaped the culture in that it wasn't just a bunch of, white guys. At Indeed, we really only started thinking about and working on this stuff about 5 years ago. And it's a lot more work to change, a ship that's already at sea, than to start that way. And so, if our CTO likes to say that old adage of the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago, the second best time is today. So we sort of decided 5 years ago, okay, now we're going to start working on this. It would have been great if we had started 10 years ago. It would have been great if they had started even before I got here. And I think that that's something that anyone who's at an earlier stage, now is a really great time to start thinking about these things, because the research is all really clear. Even if you don't value it because you want to be in an environment that's more diverse, or you don't care about the fact that people feeling included and like they belong makes for a better culture, pretend you don't care about any of that stuff. Just read the Harvard, Business Review analysis and the McKinsey analysis. Companies with more diversity of, background and experience are more profitable. They have higher valuations than their counterparts. They are more innovative. They're far more customer oriented. My favorite story that I love to tell is Rihanna. Everyone knows her as the singer, but she is now this, multi-billion-dollar executive who saw a huge hole in the market for cosmetics, and that, for however many hundreds of years there's been a cosmetic industry, primarily the shades are a very narrow set of pale shades for, white skin. And so she launched this business, Fenty, with 40 different shades of makeup to match the full range, as much as possible of the human palette. And they did like $600 million of revenue in the first 6 months, and have completely transformed the entire industry. And now every single cosmetics company is doing it. But it was, it was not like that idea didn't exist before, but it took someone who had experienced it herself to come up with this idea. And so in our world, that's really, really important, because where disparities show up in the world, you have healthcare, you have the criminal justice system, but income inequality and opportunities for employment is like one of the biggest areas where bias and barriers exist. And our ability, our mission is to help people get jobs, and that's all people. And if we're going to do that well, we have to really be able to look at things from a whole bunch of different angles. And that includes how we can build debiasing into our products, but also how we think about things like algorithmic fairness and bias and ethics in AI. And those were questions that we weren't really asking when it was mostly white men in engineering organization. I would love to say that, people who are woke and conscious could sort of figure this stuff out on their own, but it's really important. And that is something that, if I had told myself, start thinking about this now, we would be farther along. We've done a lot of work and we've come a long way, but that's something that you can't go back and change.
Yeah, I think that's an incredibly thoughtful perspective. You actually have great scores for diversity and from women on Comparably for Indeed, so we see the data. And I think the data is clear that makes for better businesses, and it's just the right thing to do. That to me is the most simple point. I want to go forward for a moment, and I think there's no one better than you to kind of get a sense of where job seeking is going. To me, I think you really thoughtfully said, how the whole game shifted around a classified model to search. To me, actually, the second biggest thing that changed about job seeking, that you are at the forefront, that your sister company Glassdoor is, and obviously what we do, is that there's no candidate today that ever takes a job without massively researching that company. And that's something it sounds so obvious that everyone would do that, but you couldn't even do that 10 years ago. There was no way to understand what it was like to work at a company. I think there are personally going to be a lot more seismic shifts in the way people find the right employer. And to me, I think the core problem that you are at the forefront of trying to solve today, so I want to hear what you're doing about it today, but also where you see it going, is how does the candidate find the right company for them, right? And that's in the market that we've had the last couple of years. And now that it's probably going to balance out a little bit, where employers have a little bit more selection and leverage in the job market, how do they find the right candidate for their business? And, just very transparently, we started off trying to solve that problem. We actually built a lot of technology at Comparably to match candidates in a different way to employers. And I just kind of made a decision early on that even though we built some technology I thought was better, I didn't think we had the scale to pull it off. And so we kind of just went back to saying, you know what, we're going to be the best at employer brand. We're going to be the best at recruiting. And we're not going to be a job platform at all, even if we have a thesis of how we might do this. I'd love to get your take. Like if you fast forwarded 10 years from today, how do we actually solve the issue of companies finding the best candidates for them, and for candidates being able to find the right employer for the experiences that they want to have?
Yeah, no, that's something we spent a lot of time thinking about, and research is one big piece of it, but so much comes down to the first time two human beings have a conversation with each other, and so our focus. So I talked a little bit about kind of at a high level our strategy of what I refer to as get closer to the hire. So we started with clicks, then applies, then sort of moving on down. So for us, one of the big things that we've been focused on for the last couple of years, and then especially right now, since COVID-19 hit, is getting someone as quickly as possible to an interview on our platform. And a big part of that, so we need to use as much as we can that we know about companies, that we know about jobs, that we know about people, to help create the right first introduction. But I think there's almost no replacement for, if I sit down and I can read all the stuff and that's going to be a filter, but then when I sit down and talk to you, I'm going to get a whole lot of insight about the company based on that first interaction with you. And what do you care about? What do you talk about? What kind of questions are you asking? How do we interact? And so our big focus right now is how do we actually, like that vision that I talked about, push a button, get a job. If you're going to do that, we have to have all this stuff happening on our platform. And so we're really investing right now in this sort of shift that we think of as like direct to interview. How do I go from basically finding something to talking to a human being as quickly as possible? And so this is something that we've been working on for a long time. We had an offline product of what we call Indeed hiring events, where people who are trying to hire in large scale, 30, 50, 100 people at a time, where we could basically help match people those opportunities, get them to RSVP, and then get them to show up and check in at an offline event. We also believed at some point that was going to go virtual, but we thought that was like 5 or 10 years in the future. And then suddenly in March, no in-person interviews are happening. And all of these companies who, when we talked to them about this virtual platform that we were building, said, we need to talk to someone face-to-face. That's never going to happen. They all said, okay, well, we still need to hire. What can we do? And so we've, put a huge amount of focus and energy on building out this platform. And what we found is that there's so much time wasted in the searching and it's almost like all the stuff that we've been doing for the last 16 years should eventually go away. And we should just be able to take people based on what we know about them and just get them talking to the right person. So we're doing that now. We've had over 2,000 virtual hiring events since April when we launched this thing. And it's been amazing. All of these companies, they're trying to figure out all this new technology, but we have this end-to-end platform now where we can go from someone seeing a job to talking to a human being, and sometimes even in the same day. And I think that's, to me, that's the human connection is never going to go away, and the data is going to help guide the right matches. So it's not a waste of time. If I'm scheduling time between you and someone else, that you're talking to someone that you want to talk to and they want to talk to you, but then there's no better view of a culture than talking to someone.
I could probably take up the rest of your day. I've got a million questions. I know you got this global international business of 10,000 people to run. So maybe last thing we'll touch on that I know is paramount to both of us, which is company culture. And I think maybe frame it, especially in this time, right? We're living through historic times right now, completely unprecedented. I think it's going to be clear to a lot of people what's kind of special and unique about your leadership style. You all actually just won our Best Leadership Award. You've won a couple different awards on Comparably these days. Uh, how do you think about building an extraordinary culture, and what are the things that you and Indeed have had to do and that other company leaders will need to do in this time of COVID and so much change? And um, you obviously are, I talk about this for ourselves, like we're both companies that help rate and showcase how other company cultures are,
Right.
which means we better have our stuff together, and so how do you think about building that great culture at Indeed and doing it at a time like this?
Yeah, so I think the key to Indeed culture does come back to that mission, and I think that that both was true before COVID and is especially true now. But having worked at other places before, there's nothing to me that's more essential than actually caring about the end result of what you're doing. And I worked on stuff that was intellectually challenging and with smart people, but at the end of the day, at this other company, I didn't really care too much about helping companies sell more stuff. Jobs, is something that is really, really meaningful to me personally. And it's something going back to, my grandfather and him talking about, work as a source of dignity, just basic human dignity, and how important that was. And it's something that's always sort of meant something to me. And when it is 3 o'clock in the morning and things are not working out and you're banging your head against the wall, if you really care about what you're doing, then you're willing to keep banging your head a little longer. So a big part of the culture for us is having this mission that's meaningful and then acting like it. So it's also, a mission can be a nice thing that, looks good on the entryway to the building or on your t-shirt. But if you don't actually live it and breathe it, then it's actually detrimental, because then people just get super cynical about it. So it's been really important for us that is how we actually run the business. Right now, our mission is more important than it's ever been. People essentially are concerned with two things right now, which is the health and safety of their family and their community, and then, economic opportunity. We've got 30 million people in the US alone who are looking for work right now. And so for all of Indeed employees, and it's been an incredibly challenging and really amazing 6 months. We're on today is 171 days that we've been working from home. We started a little early. And so everyone who works at Indeed is worried about their health and safety and their families and their communities. But the fact that every single person has this North Star, which is, we know that when we're not coming to work, but when we come into our whatever makeshift office we have set up and sit down in front of our computer, that we're doing something that is helping people in one of the most important things that they need in their lives right now. That has been incredibly sustaining and inspiring and motivating for all of our employees. So I think that the whole thing just comes down to, what is it that you do? What is the mission? What is it? I would say that how many people get jobs is what gets us out of bed in the morning and what keeps us up at night. And if you have that, then the rest of the stuff falls in place. If you don't have that, I'm not really clever enough to explain how to create a culture around something where the fundamental building block, isn't that you're doing something that means something to you.
Yeah. Well, I just want to say thank you again, Chris, for your time today, all the wisdom. To me, it's pretty rare. Like, you meet people in life that I think are thoughtful and humble. Sometimes you meet people that are incredibly successful. It's pretty rare for me to meet folks that are both. And that was my first impression of you when we met a whole bunch of years back. And I've learned a lot from you over the years. And honestly, I learned a lot from you today. I think that what you described as, the trap that leaders can fall into of being too rigid or getting too much in their own ideas. I mean, I definitely fall in that camp. So you taught me a lot today. And just thank you so much, especially with everything going on in the world and with your business, for taking out so much time today. It's amazing to see the journey that it Indeed's been on. And I have no doubt with you at the helm, it's just going to continue to grow even farther and faster than before. So thanks for all the good you're doing in the world, and for joining us today.
Thanks for the opportunity, and thanks for being a great friend and supporter and partner. And looking forward to the next time we get to sit down and talk.
Likewise. All right, everybody, be safe, take care, and stay sane in these crazy times. Thank you, everybody, for joining us again.